What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and I decided to make a little bit of a last-second video here to do a dress rehearsal for the NFL draft. We have the NFL draft on Thursday. All we can think about in Dynasty is the rookie draft, what picks we're going to make where, and I decided let's do it one more time. We have a 7-round mock draft from Matt Miller over at ESPN, and we're going to go through and do a rookie draft, or a rookie mock draft, just me, going through how I see the top 24 picks in Superflex tight end premium rookie drafts based on this mock. If all of the landing spots that happened here happened in real life, this is how it would look. I just think it would be a good exercise one last time before we get real draft capital and real landing spots. So with all that being said, we have a lot to get into. 24 players, 24 picks to make. So as always, if you enjoy, leave a like, subscribe. Let's go.
I got the juice, I got the juice. 10-0, Chatham's home. Foolies glad I'm home.
So this is going to be us in Sleeper making the picks. Here is the landing spots we ended up with. That is day 3. This is day 1. I'll probably take down day 3 as we go. I don't think I drafted any day 3 players in here, but I have it up in case if you guys wanted to see it. You know, I spent a little bit of time making some pretty like name labels and color coding things based on what Sleeper has for quarterback, wide receiver, tight end. But pretty chalky from Matt Miller, right? Panthers go young. You got CJ Stroud next, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, all in the top 12 picks. JSN wide receiver 1. I'm trying to see if anything else sticks out. We'll kind of go through the rest here as we go. I'm sure that you guys sort of see what sticks out. Of course, you know, Bills, Quentin Johnston, Jordan Addison going to the Chiefs. A lot of nice stuff for fantasy, at least from the wide receiver side of things. So let's get the day 3 guys out of here. We'll keep day 2s in the background. And first up, you know, this is the pick every time, especially if he's going to go 21st overall to the Chargers, which is where he went the last time we did one of these rookie mocks. So there's really not a ton to talk through. I tried to, you guys know me. We'll run long, but I tried to make the bullet points a little bit condensed because at this point, there's no reason for me to sell you guys on Bijan Robinson for the 18th time. But we have Bijan Robinson, 101. I wrote down tiers as well, just in terms of how I'm thinking through things. Bijan, tier of his own, beautiful landing spot. You have Kellen Moore, who I looked up in the last 4 years. So he had 4 years as offensive coordinator for the Cowboys. He ranked 6th, 17th, which was the year that Dak got hurt in 2020, then 1st and 4th. In points scored on offense. So that's 3 of his 4 years being inside the top 6 for points scored on offense. He should have this Chargers offense absolutely humming with Justin Herbert. And we've seen him make stars out of running backs, right, with Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott. Bijan Robinson comes in, gets an electric offense to be in, gets a great offensive line with Corey Linsley, and I believe Rashawn Slater's there as well. Even if Austin Eckler's there in year 1, he should be a back-end RB1, and then once Eckler is gone, he should be a top 3 running back in all of fantasy. Dynasty, of course, RB1, redraft, top 3 type guy, 20-plus points per game as his maximum upside type outcome, which is really, really nice. Now, this is where it gets interesting. This is my tier break to essentially the top 3 quarterbacks. In this scenario, if all of them get top 12 draft capital, they all become elite quarterbacks in the RS grades. Now, we're going to be referencing like elite, gold, and stuff, and it's just my prospect model. I have legendary, elite, gold, silver, bronze. All of them are just corresponding with points per game through your first 3 years and your hit rate of, you know, a QB1 season, and that's for all of the positions. So all of these guys in my elite tier, none of them hit legendary. So when all of them are pretty close together, first, I want them to be pushed up, right, because they're all the top 3. We know quarterbacks are like 8 to 10 quarterbacks go in the first round of startups. Getting one early in a rookie draft, one that has top 12 draft capital, is your best bet at hitting on the upside of a first-round startup pick, right? An untouchable type asset. So that's what we're chasing here. So at the 102, again, I'll have all these guys back to back to back in my rankings, but for rookie draft purposes, give me Anthony Richardson in Superflex. He gets arguably the best spot here. He goes 7th overall to the Raiders, and he's going to have a really nice supporting cast where he's going to have Josh Jacobs to lean on in the run game. He's going to have Devontae Adams, which is the best weapon by far that any of these rookie wide receivers could have. He also has Jacoby Myers, Hunter Renfrow. It's a really, really nice spot for him to go. And I think something that's underrated, if he was to go to the Raiders, is that Josh McDaniels has had this type of quarterback before. Tim Tebow on the Broncos. Tim Tebow, of course, way worse prospect than Anthony Richardson, less athletic, came out as like a redshirt senior, was really good in school, had like a weird throwing mechanic, and Josh McDaniel had a vision for this offense. He was way before his time, honestly. As much shit as you want to give Josh McDaniels, he came into the Broncos, and the idea of like a mobile quarterback like Tim Tebow, there were a couple guys back then that were mobile. Like, of course, you had Mike Vick and stuff, but it wasn't like it is now where, it's a rushing quarterback league. He was kind of ahead of his time there. And even Tim Tebow, a guy who was not good, was not a good NFL starter, he made absolute magic with him. Tim Tebow started his last 3 games of his rookie year, and this is him as a rookie. And you can see the fantasy points per game, 23, 24, 29 were his fantasy point outputs in his 3 starts for the Broncos. Now, of course, like the passing, like 55% completion in the game 2, 44% in his final game, and none of it mattered. He schemed it in a way where he could rush, he could get rushing touchdowns, he could score points, look good out there for what we need in fantasy. Anthony Richardson could do essentially this, but much better, much more upside, not the same, like, old prospect, weird loopy throwing motion, better draft capital as well here. So give me Anthony Richardson at the 2 spot here, 102 overall. You also have Jimmy Garoppolo there, which is kind of the perfect like bridge quarterback idea where, Mahomes sat behind Alex Smith. Jimmy Garoppolo is kind of that same type of quarterback. So I'm not as concerned if he does sit a full season. I think he would hold a lot of that upside or a lot of that value the same way that Trey Lance did, right? He was still like a second-round startup pick despite only starting like 1 game as a rookie or 2 games as a rookie. So I think that he'll hold value if he doesn't start in year 1 if it is a true like sit behind Jimmy Garoppolo thing. If not, he could come in, and I think Josh McDaniels could get him humming right away, even if he's not that polished of a passer on day 1. Now, if you want to go Bryce Young, that's completely fine. That's who we're going to go at 103. He goes first overall to the Panthers, and we have a pretty good track record of first overall picks at this point. Like, of course, you have the high-end guys like Cam Newton and everything, but I believe the number is 70% of all first overall picks since 2007 have hit a QB1 point per game season, so top 12 point per game season. It's a pretty safe bet. He'll have every opportunity to go out there and play, and he is probably the only quarterback, right? You have Stroud to the Colts, who Gardner Minshew's there, so maybe he sits like a couple of games behind Minshew. Richardson with Jimmy Garoppolo, Will Levis with Ryan Tannehill. Bryce Young comes into an empty quarterback room. He is a lock to start week 1, unlike the other guys. And then you also have a really nice foundation for him where you have Frank Reich and Josh McCown coming in, and they kind of get, I guess you could call it their pick of the litter, and they can just kind of mold that quarterback into what they want it to be. So that's a nice spot for him to be. The surrounding cast isn't great, but it's also not terrible. It's a good offensive line. You have, I believe the guy's name is Taylor Moton, 1 tackle. You have Ike Mekwonu at the other one, top 5 pick last year. Both really solid. You have Adam Thielen, Terrace Marshall, Hayden Hurst. And then in this mock draft, they draft 3 more wide receivers. I believe they take them all on day 3, but they take like A.T. Perry. They take, I don't even know who that is. Dario Durden or something like that. And then they also take Cedric Tillman, 39th overall, to the Panthers. So they get, they kind of bring in a bunch of help for the Panthers in this mock. It wouldn't be a dream, but it would be decent. He also has sneaky rushing upside compared to C.J. Stroud. C.J. Stroud, just 1.45 points per game on the ground in his final season. Bryce Young had 4.59 rushing points per game in his final season. So a little bit more open to rush, but you can make the case with Stroud, who's going to be my 104 out of Ohio State, gets drafted 4th overall to the Colts. You can make the case that Stroud, like Justin Fields, who ended up rushing more once he got to the NFL than he did in college. When you're throwing to JSN, Marvin Harrison Jr., Egbuka, same thing with Justin Fields with Olave and Garrett Wilson, it's probably your best bet to sit in the pocket and throw to a wide receiver who's wide open, just undressing a D1 DB, right? But you come to the NFL, you come to the Colts where your options are Alec Pierce, Michael Pittman, Jelani Woods, and in this mock, Jalen Hyatt, which isn't a bad supporting cast, but it's worse than what he had at Ohio State, at least comparatively to the competition. So maybe he'd have to run a little bit more. You have Shane Steichen, the head coach over there, who came from the Eagles. They ran a little bit with Jalen Hurts. I doubt it would be a similar offense to what they did with Jalen Hurts, but he's going to want to install, zone read type stuff. If Stroud is open to it, maybe design scrambles. We'll see. I think it would be one of the better spots, the Colts, to get some design rushes in there. And, of course, he's not going to be Lamar Jackson, but, maybe in that Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes range of about like 3 fantasy points on the ground a game. I think that is in his range. Now, I'm also open to the fact that CJ Stroud, 50.8% completion percentage on throws of 20-plus yards. Bryce Young was at 44%, Richardson at 41%. Super accurate, throws downfield, super accurate. I'm open to the idea that he comes in as just a stone-cold accuracy assassin, like we saw with Joe Burrow. That could very likely be the case right out the gate. So if you want to have him at 102, go ahead. Again, all 3 of these guys in like my startup rankings, like my top 250, top 300, it's going to be these 3 quarterbacks back to back to back. Now, I do want to say, if you're watching this video, if you're having a good time, make sure you check out patreon.com/Ron Stewart. I will have my rookie rankings on there. Literally, my plan is to have the RS grades, which is my prospect model. I'll have the RS grades inputted with the draft capital that we get from Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I'll have all of those finalized by Saturday night. And then the goal is to have rookie rankings for you guys either by that Saturday night or that Sunday morning. So if you have a rookie draft coming up that's really, really soon, my goal is to get the prospect grades all in there for you guys, get the rookie rankings all in there for you guys, so you can go out there, crush all week, crush all of your rookie drafts, and I'll probably even like tier them and maybe even write something up on Discord about kind of where I see the tiers, what I'm looking at in rookie drafts, all of that. So if you want access to that and more, and my redraft coverage, and just a spot in one of the best Discord communities out there, patreon.com/Ron Stewart. That'll be down below in the description and down below in the comments. Now, this is where I see the next tier break. Of course, you have Bijan, the 3 quarterbacks. That's kind of where it's been, or where I've been the entire time here. But this is where it gets tough, because Bijan, late first-round startup pick. The 3 quarterbacks, easily second-round startup picks. But then it gets tough because I've leaned on JSN here, and I'm going to put JSN here. But this landing spot just got a whole lot uglier, going 12th overall to the Texans, and the Texans don't take a quarterback in this draft. So they don't take Levis, they don't take Richardson, they don't take Stroud, and you are stuck with 3rd-round Jaren Hall, Davis Mills, and just a whole bunch of nothing at quarterback. So that is really, really tough, right? Right out the gate, it's going to be tough, but we have seen wide receivers go to bad situations before and produce. So it's not the end of the world, but it's not super ideal. But I'm still going to lean on my, thoughts on JSN, which is that he is the clear wide receiver 1. I would call him a wide receiver 1 in this class in a tier of his own. PPR monster out of the slot, elite short area quickness, a guy that I think can be special in the NFL, was on that Jamar Chase trajectory after a crazy year 2 next to NFL studs, could have sat out and still gone like top 10, top 15. So if he goes 12th overall, that's big boy draft capital. He will be, the wide receiver 1 right out the gates on the Texans. And you just hope that in this scenario, the Texans like maybe trade for a Trey Lance and get some kind of upside swing at quarterback. Now, after JSN, this is a tier, honestly, from like 105 to 109. You can order any of these guys whatever way you want. But at 6, pretty much for the same reasons as the top 3 quarterbacks, we're going to go Will Levis. Top 12 draft capital is very much an important thing. He goes top 12. He goes 11th overall. That's still in really nice quarterback range. That's still a really high investment of draft capital, of resources here. And for that reason, I'll put him at 6th. Again, mobile QBs, especially QBs drafted in the top 12, all really, really good bets to be in the top 12 of startup drafts and be untouchable in Dynasty. I want as many dice rolls on that super crazy outcome, right? Like JSN, it's much easier. Like Will Levis maybe has to hit like 80th percentile outcome. JSN has to beat Jefferson or Jamar Chase to be a first-round startup pick, and that's just what it is right now. Will Levis, Trey Lance was like a 110, 111, 112 guy last offseason with like 2 games started under his belt. So Will Levis has a much easier path to get there. He's going to be on the Titans, which I think isn't a terrible, terrible spot. Like it's bad for sure, but you kind of have a nice system in place with like Vrabel there, who's been the CEO of that like team for a while, and he's going to have Okonkwo, Treylon Burks, Derrick Henry, and then you also get Jonathan Mingo, who they took, I want to say, 41st overall in this mock draft. So it's not a complete wasteland. It's not amazing, but it's not a complete wasteland. Maybe he can learn from Ryan Tannehill. I think Will Levis, and I think Ryan Tannehill is actually one of the better comps for Will Levis, where raw coming out of school and then sort of got molded into a nice QB. Now, I think what we have to think about with Levis is, of course, the passing metrics aren't great. The negative EPA on sacks isn't great. He takes really bad sacks. He turns the ball over. But we have to think through, when this player hits, what does that look like, right? And that's what it is with Will Levis. I think if we weren't talking about Anthony Richardson, we would talk about Will Levis as being pretty athletic. He is huge, right? 10.6-inch hands, bigger than Josh Allen. He is an inch shorter, 8 pounds lighter than Josh Allen, but same like big physical frame. And if we look here, he didn't run or anything, but his vertical and broad jump were both elite numbers for quarterback. 34-inch vertical is really impressive. Like, he could probably dunk. 10-inch broad jump is really impressive. Both of those numbers beat out Josh Allen. So I don't know what he would run in the 40-yard dash, but I do know on PFF, his second to last season, before all the injuries, he had like 800-plus rushing yards. So this is a guy that he comes up as a statue in the RS grades, but in my head, he's mobile. I think he can scramble. I think that he has similar rushing upside to a guy that we've seen like Ryan Tannehill and Carson Wentz. He's not going to be Lamar Jackson, but I do think he can add some rushing on the ground. Now, he's going to come in as a gold quarterback prospect, which isn't amazing. But if we look through all gold quarterback prospects that went pick 2 through 12, so not first overall pick, but 2 through 12, so outside the first overall pick, but still decent draft capital for a quarterback, 5 of 11 of these quarterbacks have hit 15-plus points per game in their first 3 seasons. I think that would be a solid outcome, right? I think that like his absolute ceiling is early career Carson Wentz, but I think other like fine outcomes that you could easily cash out on, right? You draft him at the 106 and you can cash out for like a 3rd-round startup pick value later on. You have Blake Bortles, who had that crazy year 2 with Allen Robinson and Allen Hurns. Daniel Jones, who's coming around this year. Ryan Tannehill, late year resurgence. Mitch Trubisky like wasn't awful for fantasy purposes early on. There's some outs to this bet. I think like early Carson Wentz is the one you should be gunning for, or the one that you should be tying to Will Levis. Of course, like you can put Josh Allen in there as someone that was like not great analytically, but he graded out as an elite for me in the RS grades. Now, our next player is going to be Jahmyr Gibbs, who you can make the case to move him back. I think in this scenario where JSN doesn't get a good quarterback, I would move him to 5th overall if he went first round. If Jahmyr Gibbs goes first round, that takes him out of like, we get scared that he could be a Giovanni Bernard, right? He comes in and he's immediately kind of outcasted or pigeonholed into receiving only satellite back. But if he goes first round, you start to move away from that. And you start to move towards, like Chris Johnson, Christian McCaffrey, guys who are bell cows for their teams. Javid Best as well, who was super underrated. His rookie year, Javid Best, was really, really strong. So Jahmyr Gibbs, if he goes first round, I put him there. But in this mock, he goes 50th overall to the Buccaneers, which is like the worst landing spot because they already have what was last year's best receiving running back prospect in Rachaad White. And then they also have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin to throw to. So there's a lot of like theoretical mouths to feed. You have Baker Mayfield, who's not exactly a check down specialist over there. So it gets tough. But like with JSN, and something that I've been banging the drum on since the beginning of time, or since the beginning that I've made videos, is we lean on the draft profile, not the landing spot. He still goes second round. He still is a great profile. He's 4.3 speed. He has upside for 70-plus catches. And we've seen these running backs come in year 1, not do a ton, and get vaulted up to like the 2nd, 3rd round of startup drafts. And that is the bet with Jahmyr Gibbs, that he shows enough in year 1 and gains a ton of value. We saw it with Kerryon Johnson, who wasn't very good. We saw it with Darius Geist, didn't even really do much. I think he had a redshirt rookie year, and he still ended up as like a 2-3 turn guy in startups. You had Cam Akers, J.K. Dobbins, Miles Sanders, even like Javonte Williams is a guy like that. So you don't even need like an RB1 season for him to be considered like a top 8 dynasty running back. So even in a pretty tough spot there, I will bet on Jahmyr Gibbs. And then I would usually see a tier break here to 8 and 9. But because Jordan Addison and Quentin Johnson got really, really nice landing spots here, Johnson with the Bills and Addison with the Chiefs, you can kind of just pick your favorite of the two. If you want to even move one of them to your wide receiver 1, you can, but I'm still just going to default to JSN, especially if he goes 12th overall versus these guys, and just sort of how I felt about them the entire process. Now, you can pick whoever you'd like. I will be going I'll be going Quentin Johnston at 108. Quentin Johnson grades out as an elite prospect. Jordan Addison grades out as a gold. They're both really sexy landing spots. Give me the guy that my model likes a little bit better, Quentin Johnson, a little bit more upside as well as a prototypical outside wide receiver, high ADOT, high yak, explosive guy, just needs everything to fall in place for him. And I think that he is a perfect fit in Buffalo. I talked about this earlier on Splash Play with Pete Overzet and Chris Spags. By the way, check out their channel, Splash Play. I went on there earlier today. We kind of talked through this class. And I love Quentin Johnson on the Bills because the Bills have a problem that they keep trying to fix with the running backs with like Nyheim Hines and James Cook. They want a guy where when things go wrong, he can make his own offense, right? Like Josh Allen can check it down and then that guy can make an explosive play and get a first down. The issue is if you're doing that out of the backfield, it's a little bit tougher, especially like James Cook and Nyheim Hines aren't like ultra explosive or anything. The issue is Gabe Davis and Stephon Diggs aren't very explosive. They're not very yak oriented. They're both the Bills don't have a single wide receiver last year that were inside the top 50 yak per reception wide receivers on PFF. So you have Quentin Johnson coming in here, and that's what he specializes in. You can have him run out of the slot, run out wide as your true X or a Z, and you can just sort of have him create some offense when you need it, right? Stephon Diggs double covered. Josh Allen is, taking middle linebackers that are trying to make sure he doesn't scramble for 45 yards. And you might just have wide open Quentin Johnson across the formation, and he can catch the ball 5-10 yards downfield and make a huge play when the Bills might need it. This is a really cool chart. I think it's from Scott Barrett. He posted it on Twitter. Quentin Johnson here. This is yak per reception with missed tackles forced per reception. And I don't know why I have the chart like halfway off the screen, but you can see Quentin Johnson has the highest Power 5 since 2014 missed tackles forced per reception. He is all the way there past Kadarius Toney, and his yak per reception is still really high. And you have to remember as well, his ADOT is like 13 yards downfield. So he can't have the same type of yak per reception as these other guys where they catch it at the line of scrimmage and, you can go 15 yards downfield from there. Quentin Johnson, you catch it 13 yards downfield, you're going to have a yards per reception of like 30 if your yak per reception keeps up with, your guys like Jalen Waddle and Brandon Ayuk. So Quentin Johnson, really special in the open field, and I think that would be the perfect aspect to the Bills' offense they don't have. They don't have anybody that can take the ball and create their own offense outside of Josh Allen. I would absolutely love it. Super high upside, gets Josh Allen throwing him the football, would be a match made in heaven. Then we have Jordan Addison, who you can gush for all of the same reasons, right? Travis Kelce is elite at beating zone, and you have a lot of those types of wide receivers there. Like I think Kadarius Toney's a guy that can beat zone pretty well across the middle, but Jordan Addison would be a guy that comes in right away, can win against man, can play inside, can play outside, and be their true number one wide receiver, and that's really sexy with Patrick Mahomes. Right now, we have seen people get burned, right? Sky Moore to the Chiefs was pretty tough last year. Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think Jordan Addison's a better prospect than those guys, but it is something to be wary of. I think you could make the case to put Addison all the way at 105 in this scenario, but I'm going to be a little bit more conservative, lean on the side of the RS grades, having him as a gold. Again, this is probably the highest I could have him, but if you want to have him at the top of this tier, you can all the way. I know it's Mahomes. I know they need a man beater. He makes a ton of sense. Now, this is where we have a pretty big tier gap, and this is where a lot of dynasty owners and managers have said, this is kind of where things fall off, and I sort of agree. I do think that you'll have people maybe come up and take like a favorite player, whether they want to like push up a Hendon Hooker in this scenario, if they want to push up a Michael Mayer, but we're going to go, I think this is a little bit of a weird one, but this is a weird tier in general. We have like wide receiver 2 types, we have Hendon Hooker, you have the tight ends, but I'm going to go Josh Downs here at 110. Now, this won't be his ADP, and if it's not his ADP, it's likely not where I'll be drafting him in this scenario, but it's where I'd have him in my rankings. You can pick your flavor between Downs and Zay Flowers. I'm going to go Downs here for a couple reasons. The first is Josh Downs grades out as elite in my model, despite being a round 2 pick here. He would be next to JSN and Quentin Johnson as the only elite wide receiver prospects in this class. Now, that doesn't mean that Josh Downs has the same upside as JSN and Quentin Johnson. I think that they have upside of your, JSN can be CeeDee Lamb, and Quentin Johnson can be, a big wide receiver. I'm trying to think through some of these like round 1, like big hulking wide receivers that were elite prospects, but you're not Devontae Adams, but I'm trying to think through myself, but not Julio Jones, of course, but like AJ Brown would be one. Like, and I know that he's a year 2 guy. I just can't think of any year 1 guys off the top of my head, or round 1 guys off the top of my head that were big and dominated. But I like, or not but, I like, but Josh Downs, the issue with him is he doesn't have that same type of upside. Like if we look at the round 2 elite wide receivers, it's a good group to be a part of, don't get me wrong. But the guys who like really, really hit are T. Higgins, A.J. Brown, Metcalf, Devontae Adams, Allen Robinson, Alshon Jeffrey. Josh Downs is 5'8", so he's not in that same category of wide receiver. He's much more of Elijah Moore, Tyler Boyd, Marquise Lee, which is a much lower ceiling but higher floor type prospect. I think that he's a really, really, really strong bet to have a top 24 wide receiver season at some point, but him being an elite prospect doesn't mean that he's going to smash and be like a top 5 guy ever. I don't think that's in his range, but I think he's a very strong bet to finish as a top 24 guy. And when we move past Johnston, and all of these guys are tiny wide receiver 2 types, give me the one that's the safest bet in Josh Downs. On top of that, you get a really nice landing spot. He goes second round, 37th overall, barely second round. He goes to the Seahawks. Geno Smith hopefully is just as good as he was last year. They should pass the ball a good bit. And he's a natural fit where Lockett and Metcalf were both on their 50% of their routes ran out of the slot last year. So you have a natural slot there, their third wide receiver, a guy that can kind of open things up underneath, and that would be beautiful. Now, if you want to put Zay Flowers ahead, you can, but I'll put him at 111 here. Zay Flowers, he's just a tougher bet to make because he has the same limited upside concerns as Josh Downs, but as a round 1 gold wide receiver, he's pretty tough. This is every round 1 gold wide receiver under 6 foot. It's not a good list. He is all the way there at the bottom. You have Kendall Wright, Ted Ginn, Corey Coleman, John Ross, Henry Ruggs, Jalen Reagor, and Jahan Dotson. I mean, Dotson was solid last year. You can make the case that Henry Ruggs right before the arrest was like looking decent, but this isn't to say that this is a like complete deal breaker. I could have showed you the same list of like gold round 1 wide receivers that weren't early declares, and Chris Olave would have looked like he sucked. So I do acknowledge that Zay Flowers can supersede this. I acknowledge that Zay Flowers almost reminds me of Jalen Waddle in a way, where he's an older prospect and the film guys absolutely gush over him. So I'm open to the idea that the spreadsheets are wrong when it comes to Zay Flowers, but this is about as high as I can put an undersized wide receiver. He can win, but he goes to the Ravens here in the first round. I almost like the Seahawks as a better landing spot in the second round here. He goes to the Ravens. He'll be behind Mark Andrews. He'll have to fight with OBJ and Rashad Bateman in an offense with Lamar Jackson that is probably at best going to be like league average in pass attempts. So it's a tough landing spot. He's a small, low upside wide receiver, at least from a number standpoint. So in that case, give me the one that has a higher probability of hitting in Josh Downs, just based on what I look at. Then we have Michael Mayer at the 112. It's tight end premium. You could honestly put him higher than this. If you want to put him higher, like I think you can make a case to have him at 110, Michael Mayer. And I honestly wouldn't mind that either. I think we've gotten to a point, myself included. I think we're as a whole probably overthinking Michael Mayer. This is a guy who, of course, he didn't blaze the combine, but was a 5-star recruit, came into Notre Dame, and just immediately was a monster producer. I have yearly thresholds for my tight ends in terms of what they should score year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, in terms of points per game at tight end, right? So it's just PPR points per game in college. I have my threshold for every year, and I take, how much above or below those thresholds did you grade out? And when we look at average points per game over my expected thresholds, Michael Mayer is behind just Kyle Pitts among round 1 tight ends in PPR points per game over expectation. So again, how much higher or lower versus those thresholds did he do? He had like 16 points per game in year 2, 16 points per game in year 3, both really, really strong numbers. And it's Kyle Pitts at 8.56 points per game over expected on average, right? So on average in a given year, Kyle Pitts went above and beyond my threshold by 8.5 points per game. Michael Mayer did it by 5.15, and then you drop all the way down to Ingram. That was 2.5 points per game over expected every year. So he, in terms of production and points per game, it's him, it's Kyle Pitts, and then it's the rest. So from a production standpoint, Michael Mayer produces a ton, and you get him to come in right away, super polished. He can run block, he can do it all. He's going to come in right away, first round pick to the Cowboys, and pretty much be Dalton Schultz, but better. He's much better. He's, of course, a much better prospect, a much better talent than Dalton Schultz, and he can just fill that exact role, right? Second target behind CeeDee Lamb, go out there, be the Dalton Schultz across the middle. It's of course, it seemed like something that Dak Prescott has gravitated towards since Dalton Schultz has sort of come into the fold here, right away, this would be a dream landing spot. Again, you could make the case as high as 110 for Mayer in this scenario. Now, this is where I have the next tier break. And this is tough because you can argue, I think you could honestly argue to have him much higher than I'll have him here. Like, I think you could argue for Hendon Hooker at 110. And that's what I'm going to take here at the 201. But this is why I wouldn't, like, I know he goes 23rd overall to the Vikings here, which is really nice. Like, usually he's a second round pick. The Vikings are a good organization to go to. But I would push back on being too excited here because late first round draft capital is so much worse than top 12 draft capital. Now, I wanted to show this when I was talking about Levis, but we'll show it here. This is something that I have been looking at since I started making prospect models for quarterbacks. And the way that I have divided up how I view draft picks is first overall, second through 12, 13 through 32, and then second round quarterbacks. And I charted them out here from 2020 through 2007. So each of these quarterbacks have minimum 3 years played in the NFL. And then it's a decent sample size so we can say, whether or not those guys panned out or not. And first overall picks average 17.4 points per game. They hit top 12 seasons 70% of the time. There's been 10 of them in that time range. Second through 12, 16.1 points per game. Really not that worse. Really not that much worse. 68%, top 12%. Really not that much worse. Decent sample, 19 QBs. Then it takes a huge downgrade, 13 to 32. You have 12.1 points per game, which isn't terrible, but it's just 17% of these quarterbacks have hit a top 12 season, and we have a sample size of 12 there. And then we go down to second round, and second round is really not that much different from late first. It's actually a better top 12 hit rate at 29%, but the points per game through your first 3 years is 8.45. And really the difference is that if you are a late first round pick, you at least get a chance. You get an audition to see what you can do. If you go second round, there's no guarantee. You could get Christian Hackenberg, right? Like Christian Hackenberg never started a game for the Jets. So that is the difference. I think in terms of like hit rate and being a huge success, not a huge difference 23rd overall versus like 40th, but in terms of getting a shot to play and prove you can do it, I guess that's the benefit. But what I'm trying to say here is after the top 12 picks, it is a huge drop off in hit rate. So Hendon Hooker going late first round is nice, but it's also not great. Like any quarterback going outside the top 12 picks are pretty rough bets to hit. Now, what I will say is he probably holds value for the first year and then probably gets ramped up going into year 2. So I can get wanting to buy Hendon Hooker as a investment asset because there's going to be so much hype. Like we saw the hype for Trey Lance last year, and we're sort of seeing the hype now with Jordan Love just a little bit. Same with Sam Howell. You could say, Hendon Hooker, Cousins is pretty much going to be gone after this year. He has Justin Jefferson, Kevin O'Connell, a really nice offensive system for him to be in. And if he is the week 1 starter of 2024, he probably gives you a profit. And then if he's good, you're making a lot more money there. So I don't mind Hendon Hooker, but 201 is probably about as high as I could put him, just considering, 25 years old, the ACL tear, and then not being a top 12 pick at QB. Now, our 202 is going to be Dalton Kincaid. I just can't turn down the 4th highest drafted tight end since 2007. In my database, the only tight ends that have been drafted higher than Dalton Kincaid are Kyle Pitts, TJ Hawkinson, Eric Ebron. That is it. All of those guys have been like pretty decent fantasy assets. Of course, Kyle Pitts is Kyle Pitts. Ebron was decent early on. Hawkinson's been pretty good here. Kincaid's tough for me because I'm a numbers guy. You guys know I'm not watching film. Dalton Kincaid, or just tight ends in general, the tight end RS grades have the highest percentage of inputs being athleticism. So 40-yard dash, agility score, all of that stuff. Kincaid, we have none of it. But what I will say is I love how he is a receiving tight end prospect. He led all tight ends last year in PFF in receiving grade. He ran over 50% of his routes from the slot. He is a true receiving weapon. He also had 17 plus points per game in his final season, which was better than anything Michael Mayer has done. But what I will say, that was in like year 5. If Michael Mayer played all the way through year 5, I'm sure he would hit 17 points per game. But in that point per game stat we showed earlier, Kincaid is actually showing up pretty well there too. Like he is right next to your Michael Mayer. Of course, Mayer's at 5 points per game over expected, but 2.86 is 3rd among all first-round tight end prospects since 2007. He's a receiving tight end. He gets drafted 13th overall. So at that point, I have to buy in. He goes to the Packers as well. You have to imagine that LaFleur is going to use him. You have to imagine that, behind Watson and Romeo Doubs, you take a guy 13th overall, he is going to go out there and be a featured part of your offense. So Dalton Kincaid, bunch of upside, the type of, archetype that we want to be targeting at tight end. Now, after that, we have Zach Charbonnet, who took a little bit of a tumble here. If Zach Charbonnet goes round 2, I probably put him 110. 110 is probably where he ends up. If he goes like round 2 to the Bengals or something, I'll put him 110. But Charbonnet falls a little bit for me here. He goes 3rd round, 66 overall to the Cardinals. And he will be my RB3 no matter what, most likely. But this is tough if he goes round 3. There's a lot of noise if he goes round 2. But if he slips to round 3, I've been somebody that has stood pretty firm on the idea that round 2 versus round 3 draft capital at running back isn't a big difference. But I do know Todd H on Twitter, he's come out against it. I know some guys have come out against it, saying round 3 draft capital is pretty brutal for running backs. And I think that they have a little bit of a point. 2017 had like Kamara, Kareem Hunt. Before that, you had like Jamal Charles and everything. Since 2017 in that historic draft class, it has been slim pickings for round 3 running backs. These are all round 3 running backs drafted since 2018. Just one of them have a top 12 season in David Montgomery, and your only real hit is David Montgomery, Antonio Gibson, and I guess Damian Harris or Darrell Henderson. But it is really, really rough out here. I guess like Rachaad White a little bit. But yeah, it is really, really rough out here for these round 3 running backs. So if you have Zach Charbonnet coming in there, it gets tough. The idea with Zach Charbonnet on the Cardinals is he comes in there, maybe he secures kind of a 3-down role. You know, James Conner's a little bit dusty. It's an absolute dumpster fire, though, which is a little bit concerning that the offense might be terrible. He might not really produce. But if he comes in there and he does anything in year 1, again, we've seen these running backs increase in value. We saw it with David Montgomery. After his rookie year, he was like a round 3, round 4 guy in startups, David Montgomery. We saw it with Antonio Gibson as well. Antonio Gibson came alive in his rookie year and was, you know, valued as like a late 2nd, early 3rd in startups. So that's the play here with Zach Charbonnet, is maybe you make a profit and he produces a little bit early on and he can catch passes and has a 3-down workhorse skill set and he gains value for you. But the Cardinals just isn't a sexy landing spot. Round 3 is a pretty tough spot to succeed for running backs nowadays. So this is where Sharp falls. But again, if he goes round 2, he would be right in this tier for me. Now, then we have a tier break. I still see Charbonnet as kind of a tier between the next like day 3 running backs, but similar story here with this next year. We have 2 day 3 running backs up top, one of them being Devin Achane, and that chart applies for him as well. And that's the bummer, right? Again, round 3 running backs haven't been the best bet, but again, it's been a decent bet for value gain, and I just love Achane's fit in Mike McDaniel's offense in Miami. I just trust McDaniel that if he's going to use a premium draft pick, right, a day 2 pick on a running back, he is going to use him. I talked about this before, but I want to say Mike McDaniel had his hand behind like the 49ers getting McKinnon, like wanting like a satellite plus type back, and then him wanting to sign Chase Edmonds in Miami. That didn't work out. If he goes out here and gets Achane, I think that he has some kind of role in place for him. And Achane is just such a playmaker, 5'8", 188 pounds, so undersized, but 4.3 speed, can catch passes, can return kicks, can run routes out of the slot, ran for 1,000+ yards in the SEC, can do it all. I think that in this Dolphins offense, he could be sort of what Raheem Mostert is in these outside zone schemes, and then also catch passes. And that's a really, really sexy type of asset where, you know, you could see like 10 to 12 carries, super, super efficient, a few catches as well, and just be a really efficient back in a Mike McDaniel offense, which is going to pass the ball a lot and be really forward thinking. You also have so much speed with Tyreek Hill and Waddle. You get another 4-3 guy in the backfield. Things get really scary. Now, our next running back, other round 3 guy, is Roschon Johnson. He's a guy I've been really coming around on recently. He looks to me, he's never going to pop in models, right? If you are a backup or not the featured back in your offense, it's really tough to pop in an analytic model. But he reminds me a ton of your Tony Pollards, your Antonio Gibson. Alvin Kamara was one. I think Alvin Kamara was out-touched by Jalen Hurd at Tennessee. Josh Jacobs at Alabama. I think Damian Harris out-touched him his final year. You get some of these running backs that weren't bell cows in school, but then come to the NFL and are bell cows for whatever reason, just because they were sort of marginalized in their role in school. And you could say that about Roschon Johnson, a guy who's been behind Bijan Robinson, the best running back in all of the land in college football for the last 3 years. So he has a decent excuse. He has a 45% missed tackles forced per attempt the last 2 seasons, which is the best in the country. That's a stat from Josh Norris on Twitter. He's also 6 foot, 220 pounds and in class with some undersized running backs, right? Gibbs sub 200 pounds. We have Achane sub 200 pounds. You have Tyjae Spears, like just a hair over 200 pounds. So 6 foot 220 is a really good size. And before Bijan came as a freshman, Roschon Johnson had over 20 catches as a freshman at Texas. That's really, really impressive. So he can catch passes, he has the requisite size, and he goes 90th overall to the Cowboys here, which is a nice spot. It's going to be a good offense with Dak Prescott, good offensive line up front, and he can kind of be the thunder to Pollard's lightning and be like a more efficient Zeke Elliott from last year on a little bit less of that workload. And Pollard's on a franchise tag, so they're only committed to him for 1 year. So he could be the 1B to Pollard for a year and then be the featured back in a Dallas offense, and that's really interesting. After that, we have, I believe, the last piece in this tier. I'm actually not sure. But we have Jalen Hyatt, who was kind of taking a tumble here. Like, I've had him as a late first, early second during the process, but his official RAS came out, his relative athletic score. After his pro day, his agility wasn't that great, and it lowered his RAS into a spot where he was an elite wide receiver prospect. Now he's just a gold, and it's tough. You know, he's a second-round wide receiver prospect. The issue is, like, his skill set doesn't really translate. He was like a slot-only downfield stretcher. You go to the Colts, I mean, like, Pittman's more of a big slot, and Alec Pierce is already a downfield threat, so it's a really weird fit there for him. You know, at least he gets C.J. Stroud there to be his quarterback, you know, an accurate downfield thrower, but it's not great. I think at this point, though, when the running backs are off the board, so there's a lot of value gain to be had there. Same thing with Hendon Hooker, the 2 elite tight ends. This is where I think top 40 pick Jalen Hyatt just has to be the pick. Now, I say top 40. This is something I want to look into more in the offseason, but something that Scott Connor over there at I think that he was Dynasty and Chill. I think he's still Dynasty and Chill. Now he's Destination Devy as well. He's been banging the drum that top 40 is kind of the magic number for wide receivers. He thinks top 10 is the best you can get at wide receiver, which I agree. And then he has 11 through 25 and 26 through 40 having very similar hit rates, right? You have, I want to say that's 18 wide receivers, picks 11 through 25 since 2013, 21 wide receivers, 26 through 40. And you can see the points per game is 10.36 versus 9.73. That's really nothing. And the wide receiver seasons of 10 points per game and 15 points per game are pretty much identical. So there's really not a big difference. Hyatt here goes 35th overall to the Colts. He falls right in that sweet spot despite having second-round draft capital. Maybe I'm being too low on him. He's in a sweet spot. He has good draft capital. He produced in the SEC. 206 is where I'll have him. After that, we'll go Tyjae Spears. And Tyjae Spears is behind the other day 3 running backs for me. And he's behind Jalen Hyatt here for this reason. Charbonnet and Roschon Johnson at their size with their pass catching, it's not crazy hard to see how they become 3-down backs in the NFL. But when we look at Tyjae Spears, and A-Chain as well, not a 3-down back, but he's such a nice scheme fit with Miami and what McDaniel's going to do there. I'll have him ahead. But Tyjae Spears is so tough for me because I get it. He's ultra explosive, super efficient runner, really exciting runner. He runs different than most guys. But man, he is not fast, right? He runs like a 4.54. He is 201 pounds and doesn't really catch passes. So if you're undersized and you're not fast and you don't catch passes, it's hard for me to really see the max upside there with Tyjae Spears. I really don't know, like, what is your ceiling outcome for Tyjae Spears in a world where he's not catching passes, he's sub 205 pounds, running a 4.5 40. It's just really, really tough for me to see him be anything more than a, like, change of pace, explosive back, like, kind of like I guess like Tevin Coleman next to Devonta Freeman is like kind of a decent comp for him, a guy that was like explosive in like a 1B type role. So that's the issue I have with him. If we look at, you know, every running back I've had ahead of him so far in receiving yard market share in their games played, Tyjae Spears doesn't even come close to the dotted line once. At least Roschon Johnson does it in his rookie year, or his first year in college, which is really impressive. A-Chain above the line all 3 years. It's just not there for a back that isn't big. So I'll put him here, like, 3rd round to the Bengals is interesting, right? It's a good offense. Joe Mixon has some stuff going on. But again, I just have a hard time seeing, you know, what do you win when you win, right? We talked about it with Will Levis. Like, what is the maximum upside case with Tyjae Spears? I think he's going to be a very good pro. He's going to be a very good pure runner. But in terms of being like a massive, massive dynasty asset, I'm not sure. And if he goes round 3 to a team that is much less sexy than the Bengals, I could have him as like a late second at this point. Now, our next player we'll have And I'm not sure where we have the tier break here, but I'll say probably after Tyjae Spears is a bit of a tier break here. But let's go with our first tight end, or not our first tight end, but the first tight end of this tier pretty much, of the second round in the NFL draft, Luke Musgrave. Luke Musgrave is a guy that I absolutely love, and I haven't really had a ton of chances to tell you guys about why I love Luke Musgrave, but it pretty much comes down to this. Production, as much as we care about it, as much as we look at it for tight ends, if you looked at all the top guys between like Travis Kelce and you looked at like Darren Waller and you looked at George Kittle and you looked at Mark Andrews, like not a lot of these guys are like monster producers in college. Athleticism is a massive input. It is the biggest input across all positions, and this is a guy who is 6'6", 253 pounds, 4.61 speed, 9.77 RAS score. And I have 3 designations for tight ends. This is an idea I got from Dynasty _IM on Twitter, a.k.a. Ian. He does really good work over there. And he made archetypes for tight ends. So freak, athletic, possession are the ones I have. I can't remember the name of his, but freak is like, your Rob Gronkowski's, your Darren Wallers. Athletic is guys who can move, right, like Mark Andrews and TJ Hawkinson. And then possession is like your Zach Ertz of the world, guys who are slow, not super athletic. Luke Musgrave qualifies as a freak, and not just a freak, but he qualifies as a gold freak. He looks really good in the RS grades, and when we look at all gold freak tight end prospects drafted outside of the first round, it is a pretty nasty list. It is Gronk, it is Kelce, Jimmy G, Darren Waller, George Kittle, and like even the lesser outcomes of like Jared Cook and Kobe Fleener and even like Mike Gesicki aren't awful. It's a really nice bucket to be a part of. He's a big play wide receiver. He's really natural. I've listened to so many draft podcasts recently. They were talking about how he was like a really nasty skier when he was growing up. I think his parents were like I don't want to say Olympic skiers, but like professional skiers in some way. He has like skiing background, track background, 6'6", can move, is super fluid. Of course, you have like injury concerns. I don't think he ever had over 500 receiving yards in college, but again, like I don't think Jimmy Graham had over 500 receiving yards in college. These guys that are just like freak athletes and go later on, you just want to take a swing on the freakiest of the bunch, which is Luke Musgrave. We didn't even mention the landing spot. He goes to the Bengals, which is perfect. No tight end competition at all. He can operate from the middle of the field and just work off of Jamar Chase and T. Higgins taking a ton of coverage away from him. So he would be really fun, Luke Musgrave. Then we have Cedric Tillman, who I think you can even make the case to put ahead of Hyatt or next to Hyatt. They're both gold wide receiver prospects for me. They both get drafted in the top 40, the number that we looked at from the tweet from Scott Connor. He goes 39th to the Panthers, so it's not like a beautiful landing spot, right? He's going to get Bryce Young to throw him the football, but that's like better than what JSN has with like Davis Mills and Jaron Hall. So it's not terrible. I like Cedric Tillman. The numbers hate him, but he gets a multiplier because Lance Zierlein has a first-round grade on him, which is really strong. He's a guy who is one of the rare big play X wide receivers in this draft class. You have Quentin Johnston, big tier break, and then Cedric Tillman at 6'3", 215 pounds, produced in the SEC. I've seen a stat float around that when he was active next to Jalen Hyatt, he actually outproduced Jalen Hyatt. It's just that he was injured this past season, and Jalen Hyatt was amazing in the games that he wasn't playing. So we get a big wide receiver prospect drafted in the top 40 picks. He's a gold wide receiver prospect. I can justify taking him honestly as high as like the 206 by Hyatt, but maybe even a little bit higher than that. Cedric Tillman's a guy who, while the numbers don't love him, I'm kind of interested in Cedric Tillman. I would just like a better landing spot than the Panthers here. Now, after that, we have 2 tight ends going off the board back-to-back. We'll go Darnell Washington, and we will go Sam Laporta. Both of these guys are kind of in similar spots where they go to good landing spots offense-wise, right? The Jaguars' offense is great. The Chiefs' offense is great. Laporta to the Chiefs, Darnell Washington to the Jaguars. But they're both behind tight ends. You have Darnell Washington behind Evan Ingram, who's there for another year. He's more of the pass-catching specialist. I think that if this happened, he would be immediately shoehorned into blocking right away, which isn't good. In a perfect world, Darnell Washington comes in as tight end 1, and they ask him to do everything, not be the tight end 2 and block in line most of the time. And you have Sam Laporta, who gets to catch passes from Mahomes, and Andy Reid probably gets creative with 2 tight end sets and uses Laporta sparingly, but until Kelce retires, it would be tough for him to ever be an elite asset. So they're both a little bit buried on the depth charts, but they get paired with essentially like 2 of the 8 franchise QBs in the NFL. They're both gold tight end prospects for me. Darnell Washington would also join Luke Musgrave on that list of gold freak tight ends drafted outside of the top first. I don't know why I was about to say top first round, but the first round. Now, our last pick here is Marvin Mims to the Saints. You can make a case, honestly, put him higher than this, but I wanted to be conservative here. I know round 3 wide receivers haven't been a great bet in years past, but if Marvin Mims, if everything holds right now, and Marvin Mims goes round 3, he will join just these 5 wide receivers as the only wide receivers to be gold or better prospects outside of the first 2 rounds. You have Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Chris Godwin, Earl Bennett, and Dante Moncrief. Of course, things could not work out. He could be Earl Bennett or Dante Moncrief. You could also make the case that Godwin, Keenan Allen, Diggs are all much bigger than Marvin Mims. But it's a good list to be a part of. He has a really strong analytical profile, early breakout, young guy, ran in the 4.3s, produced early on, was like a freshman breakout at Oklahoma. Just a really solid prospect profile. And he comes into a spot where he is one of the few wide receivers on this list, right? Of course, Quentin Johnson and Jordan Addison can say that they have competent quarterback play, Downs as well. But, you know, JSN has nothing on the Texans. Hyatt has a rookie quarterback. Tillman has a rookie quarterback. Marvin Mims gets to be like the 4th or 5th option in an offense with Derek Carr, who's a very competent quarterback. And you never know with Michael Thomas. You never know with a guy that's undrafted like Rashid Shaheed. Marvin Mims could easily come in there and be a guy who is relevant right off the bat in that Saints offense. Now, that is going to do it for us today. As always, if you enjoy, make sure you leave a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you put the post notifications on. We're going to be posting like a madman from here through the NFL draft, after the NFL draft, talking rookie draft strategy, everything you could possibly want and more. I'm staying here on this screen so you guys can see our official mock draft here. And I probably should have left this up for you guys, but I appreciate you guys coming around. Again, if you want access to the RS grades the minute that they're fresh off the press, again, this weekend I'm going to stay up late for you guys. Make sure I grind them out. Patreon.com/Ron Stewart. My RS grades, my rookie rankings, my Dynasty rankings, which I'm going to come out with a Dynasty rankings update the week after the draft. Tons of stuff planned on there. My redraft analysis is on there. Patreon.com/Ron Stewart. It'll be down below in the description, down below in the comments. And as always, I appreciate you guys, and I will see y'all in the next one.
I got the juice, I got the juice. 10-0, Chatham's on. Foolies glad I'm home. Even my haters kinda glad I'm on. Rest in peace to my vagabond. Rapper, song, singer, suspended, subpoena from misdemeanors, dreamer, held back asses, Loki still a zen, and I still shake a boat squat.